Hello and welcome to today's Association of Moving Image Archivists webinar. I want to welcome you all to our session this afternoon. We have a really wonderful 90 minutes in store for you, and I want to ensure that we have as much time for our instructors, Kate and Jim, to talk to you today about video. Before we move forward, however, I want to ensure that everyone can hear me loud and clear. So if you take a look at the control panel in front of you, please raise your hand if you can hear me. You should be able to see a hand icon in front of on the control panel, and if you can just let us know that you hear me before we begin our content. So it looks like a number of you are saying yes, yes, yes. So thank you. Perfect. Great. Okay. So today you have all joined in listen-only mode due to the number of registrants that we have. And I want to really welcome you all to today's fourth session for digital topics. And we have a record number of participants on the line today. This is our fourth in the digital session, and the webinars were developed and produced by the AMIA Online Continuing Education Task Force. My name is Kimberly Tarr, and I'm speaking with you all today from New York University. I will serve as the webinar producer for today's session, which is an overview of digital video formats, resolutions, standards, and best practices. Before we dive into the session, I'm going to provide you with some logistical information to assist those of you who are less familiar with the GoToTraining webinar interface. I see a number of names in our participant list, attendee list, who have attended sessions with us in the past. So this may be a review for some of you, but I just want to highlight the chat box, which is at the bottom of your control panel. If you have any issues or questions that come up, you can communicate with us via the chat box. Kate and Jim have a lot of information to cover today, so they'll be answering questions at their discretion, and we've definitely reserved some time at the tail end of this webinar to ensure that we can address those questions. So we'll be taking the questions via the chat box. Your audio has been disabled, but we really do want to hear from you. So please let us know if you have any questions or comments along the way. So the presentation, first screen of our presentation should be in front of you today. Kate and Jim will be advancing through the presentation, and you'll be able to watch it along with them. I do want to highlight that their presentation, along with a supplemental resources PDF, those two documents are both available in the Materials tab. So if you look in your control panel, there's a Materials tab, and you'll be able to download both the PowerPoint presentation as well as the resources PDF. We've also included a participant frequently asked questions document in there in case you have any questions as you're going along, technical questions regarding this software interface. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our instructors in just a moment, but by way of introduction, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we have with us today. Kate Murray and Jim Hone will serve as our instructors for this session. Kate Murray is the IT specialist, audiovisual, in the Technology Policy Directorate at the Library of Congress, where she primarily works with the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative, SAGI, Audiovisual Working Group, and the Sustainability of Digital Formats website. That's a mouthful, Kate. Prior to joining the Library of Congress, Kate was the Digital Process Development Specialist in the Digitization Planning Branch at the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, specializing in standardizing and documenting moving image and audio formats. Before joining government service, she worked at the University of Maryland Libraries, Emory University Libraries, University of Cape Town Libraries, and NYU Libraries. Kate is a member of IASA, SIMSI, ARS, and AES, as well as AMIA, where she was the co-chair of the AMIA Preservation Committee from 2010 to 2013. Kate received her undergraduate degree in medieval literature from Columbia University and her MB-IBL from the University of Cape Town. So welcome to Kate. I also want to introduce Jim Hone. Jim is going to be with us today as well. Jim is the Film and Media Digital Archivist at the Libraries of Washington University in St. Louis. He has over 30 years of experience in media production, preservation, and digitization, including 11 years at CBS in New York. Jim holds a BA in Government from Manhattan College and MDiv from Weston Jesuit School of Theology. He's a member of AMIA and is also a certified archivist. So I will welcome Kate. So Kate, are you on the line with us? Just one moment. Kate, are you with us?
Yes. Hi, Kim.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. But after that great introduction, I'm going to bring us plummeting down to earth because I have lost the ability to advance slides. Why is that?
Let's see here. Just one
Sorry.
moment.
Hold for technical difficulties, everyone.
Okay, we'll try that again.
All right, here we go.
See if you can now.
I am having no luck.
Okay.
Jim, can you advance? Honestly, we practiced this a second ago and it totally worked.
No, I can't.
Okay.
Well, Kim, we can just say. Can I just say to Kim, just advance slides?
Sure, certainly.
Okay, let's just do that. Okay, so advance slides. So if you can go to our first slide, Kim.
So it looks like we're having an issue advancing the slides. So just one moment.
Well, I'm going to give some of our I'll give some of our preliminary stuff because it's just sort of chatting a little bit. So, hi everybody, and welcome to this fourth webinar in AMIA series. And today we're going to focus on digital formats for video. Oh, there we go. This is fine. You can leave it here. This is a huge topic, I'll say, and so we're compressing our information, and this is my joke. We're using lossy compression because we're leaving a lot of information out, and we're just covering the basics. Our goal today is really to introduce you to the essential components you'll need to know and provide you with pointers for where you can find more information. So the slide we're on now, and you can leave it just there, Kim, is just the overview of what we're going to cover today. Our plan is to talk at you for about 60 to 75 minutes and then open it up for discussion after that. As Kim mentioned, we do have some supplementary resources that she's made available. I'm going to talk for a little bit, then I'll turn it over to Jim, and then I'll come back and wrap things up at the end. So let's see. Do I have the magic power? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, great. And I would like to point out my subtitles. Some of them are funny, so I'd appreciate if you read those. So before we get into the specifics of digital video files, we're just going to spend a few minutes talking about the definition and structure of digital files in general. I know there was a webinar earlier in the series that covered some of these things, so this may be a review for some of you, but I've tried to focus on moving image files. So can we advance this slide here? I still don't have the power to advance, or maybe I do. Okay, so as Kim mentioned, one of my tasks is to help with the Sustainability of Digital Formats website at the Library of Congress, and if we do say so ourselves, it's an excellent source of information about the structure and suitability of digital formats, including moving image formats, which I've highlighted there. We cover not only formats at the level indicated by the file extension, and so what we mean by that is .mov or MXF or AVI, but also the versions developed over time, refinements tailored to particular uses, and variants distinguished by different bitstream encodings, even if it's in a common wrapper. We also include format descriptions for bitstream encodings that may be incorporated into or used as a basis for various wrapper or bundle formats. I just threw a lot of vocabulary at you there, so let's take a step back for a minute and parse this out in a little bit more detail. So when I was thinking about how to describe this, I thought of that Charles and Ray Ames movie, The Powers of 10, that you watched in middle school, where you start at the most granular level and zoom out. And by the way, that movie was actually recommended to the U.S. National Film Registry at the Library of Congress in 1998, so there's a connection here. If we think about the most fundamental building block of any file or moving image file, really, is the codec or the bitstream. In the premise data model, a bitstream is defined as a contiguous or non-contiguous data within a file that has meaningful common properties for preservation purposes. A bitstream cannot be transformed into a standalone file without the addition of file structure, such as headers, and or reformatting the bitstream to comply with a particular file format. A codec is an example of a bitstream, and it describes the encoding or compression of information. Codecs don't have file extensions, and they cannot logically exist outside of larger file structures. Examples of video encodings are like the ProRes family, or JPEG 2000, or FFV1. Codecs or bitstreams exist. Oops, what's going on here? Sorry, we've gone too far. Okay, there we go. Codecs or bitstreams exist within larger file structures such as wrappers or containers, which have file extensions. Examples of these from the moving image world would include MOV, which is QuickTime. Okay, there we go. Okay, MOV, which is QuickTime. Matroska, which is MKV, or Audio Visual Interleave, which is AVI, and the Material Exchange Format, which is MXF. The term wrapper is often used by digital content specialists to name a file format that encapsulates its constituent bit streams and includes metadata that describes the content within. In this example, MXF wraps the image and audio data so that these objects play back in the right sequence and in sync. It also contains other essential file components commonly found in digital video files, and these might include things like timecode, captions, subtitles, and embedded metadata. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to walk you through some of the technical characteristics of digital video. All right, your turn, Jim.
Thank you. And let me just see if I can advance here. And I don't have that capability, so
that's fine. I can do it for you. Just say go.
That's fine. Just go back. Then just go back to the beginning. Well, just one back. Well, thank you, Kate. Let's look briefly at some of the complex digital components of digital video. This is only a skim of the essential parts. There's a lot we're not covering here, but the reference section contains links to find more complete and in-depth information. What is digital video? In a nutshell, it's a sequence of picture signals or frames that are represented by binary data or bits, describing a finite set of luminance or brightness levels or chrominance or color levels. Digital video isn't only about the visual image information, but it's a good place to start. If you would advance. Kim, thank you. Okay. The frame size describes the width, the horizontal dimension, and height, the vertical dimension of a single video frame in pixels, the building blocks of digital video. Various aspect ratios describe the mathematical ratio of width to height. The pixel aspect ratio, or PAR, describes how the width of a pixel in a digital image compares to the height of the same pixel. A 1-to-1 ratio indicates that the pixel is as high as it is wide, square in other words. A non-square or rectangular PAR value does not have the same height and width. In general, non-HD video pixels are rectangular, and computer and HD video pixels are square. Pixel aspect ratios vary because different video systems make various assumptions about the number of pixels required to fill a frame. There's also a display aspect ratio, or DAR, which describes the proportional relationship between the display's width and height. This value is alternately known as the image aspect ratio or the frame aspect ratio. DAR is important to ensure that the image is displayed correctly and not stretched, shortened, or cropped. For most analog TV systems, the ratio was 4:3. For HDTV, the ratio is 16:9. The aspect ratio, along with the number of vertical scan lines that make up the image, determines what the sample rate should be to digitize the video signal. And finally, there's the storage aspect ratio, or SAR, which describes the ratio of the horizontal resolution to vertical resolution. This is where numbers like 720 by 480 pixels or 1920 by 1080 pixels become important. For example, a standard NTSC DVD has a storage aspect ratio of 1.5 to 1. That's because 720 divided by 480 equals 1.5. You can advance, Kim. The following chart provides a quick overview of common video frame sizes along with the pixel and display aspect ratio. And you can see, if we look roughly in the center there, you'll see NTSC standard definition video. And you'll see that the pixel aspect ratio in this case is rectangular, and the aspect ratio is 4:3. And when you move up to something like HD video, which has very high resolution, you go to a square pixel aspect ratio, and the screen aspect ratio is 16:9. You can advance, Ken. Because the human visual system is more sensitive to brightness than it is to the position and motion of color, a video stream can be optimized by storing more luminance detail than chrominance detail. In video systems, this is achieved through the use of color difference components. The signal is divided into a luma component, or Y, and two color difference components, U and V. This is not a compressed version of RGB, the color system that describes what the camera captures, monitors display, and humans see. Rather, it is a mathematical equivalent that saves transmission bandwidth, optimizes encoding efficiency, and reduces file size. Some of the most common color coding schemes are YUV, YPB-PR, and YCB-CR. With some variation, YUV was the encoding scheme of analog television systems here abroad. It could also be combined into a single channel known as composite video. Refinements in the technology led to the development of component video, where luma and the color carriers are separated into three separate channels. YPBPR was a standard for component color developed by the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, or SMPTE. YCBCR is a digital version of the same standard. Chroma subsampling is the process of encoding images by implementing less resolution for chrominance information than for luminance information. Again, taking advantage of the human visual system's lower acuity for color differences than for luminance. In general, the higher these numbers are, the more robust the color information is within the file. The ratio 4:2 means that each horizontal scan line has 2 chroma values for every 4 luma values. Similarly, 4:1 means one chroma value is sent for every 4 luma values sent. And the ratio 4:4 means that all 3 components are sampled at the same time. There is no chroma subsampling. The bit depth indicates how detailed the measurement of the luma and chroma elements is. The higher the number, the more detailed the measurement. Most digital video formats use a minimum of 8 bits per color channel or 256 gradations of intensity, although 10-bit with 1024 gradations of intensity is generally preferred because it matches the specifications laid out for the serial digital interface as defined by the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. However, bit depths beyond 10-bit are becoming more common. You can skip to the next slide. The scan type. There are the presentation there are different methods to display, store, and transmit video image data. Next slide, Kim. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, you can go back. No, sorry. Bit depth. Okay, good. Bit depth indicates, we did that one. So there are different methods to display, store, and transmit video image data. Sorry about that, folks. The interlaced method, common to analog video systems, reduced flicker by interleaving 2 fields to create 1 frame. Each field is drawn on the screen consecutively. First one field, then the other. The field scanned first is called the odd field. the field scan. Second is called the even field. The number of field lines is 1/2 the number of frame lines. NTSC systems have 262.5 lines per field for a total of 525 scan lines. And NTSC is the color encoding system, is basically the standards for our American broadcasting systems. PAL and CCAM, which are used actually, and PAL is PAL for phase alternating line, and CCAM, which stands for sequential color and memory, these systems have 312.5 lines per field for a total of 625 scan lines. Progressive video, by contrast, starts with the lines on the top of the screen moving down to the bottom so that all the lines are displayed at the same time. HD video and video displayed on a computer screen are progressive. The entire image is refreshed at the rate of 1/160th of a second, resulting in an image with more detail and less flicker. And a third less common type is PSF, or progressive segmented frame, which is designed to acquire, store, modify, and distribute progressive scan video using interlaced equipment and media. You can go to the next slide now, Ken. Okay. Sticking with this idea of transmitting or moving the image, the frame rate is the frequency at which video samples on the screen are displayed in order to create the illusion of motion. It's expressed in frames per second. Video does not have one internationally accepted frame rate. PAL and CCAM systems use 25 frames per second, and NTSC video uses 29.97 frames per second. Other frame rates are also in use, and there's an ongoing trend to use much higher frame rates for HD and UHD workflows, especially in fast motion imagery. Stay right there, Kim. The bit rate, or data rate, refers to the speed at which the bits are transmitted, usually expressed in bits per second, or BPS. Bit rate is one means used to define the amount of compression used on a video signal. Although optimal data rates are often dependent on the codec used to compress or encode a digital file, generally speaking, a larger data rate translates into a better quality playback experience. For example, 56 kilobits per second versus 1 megabit per second. Data rates can either be constant, that is consistent over the duration of the content, that's CBR, or variable, changeable over the duration of the content, or VBR. Compression. Next slide. Compression is a major characteristic of digital video. It describes the process used to reduce the size of a file by reducing the complexity of its contents, or compressing the binary data used to encode it with mathematical algorithms, sometimes both. Compression and the need for it is a business decision. Generally, the higher the compression ratio, the poorer the video quality will be. As with most things, there is a price to pay for quality. With more colors, higher resolution, faster frame rates, and better quality, you will need more computer power and will require more storage space for your video. There are all sorts of calculations to determine file sizes. Compression techniques can be categorized into two major categories: lossless and lossy. Data compressed using a lossless compression technique will allow the decompressed data to be exactly the same as the original data before compression, bit for bit. The compression of data is achieved by coding redundant data in a more efficient manner. Data compressed using a lossy compression scheme results in the loss of information. The decompressed data will not be identical to the original uncompressed data. However, conservative lossless compression can result in a form of lossy compression referred to as visually lossless. should be slide 19. Yeah. Methods of compression include intra-frame compression. Intra-frame compression is a form of compression in which the codec compresses the data within one frame relative only to itself. Intra-frame compression utilizes strategies of spatial redundancy within the frame to identify the data that can be discarded. It relies on techniques of subsampling, quantization, and transform coding. Interframe compression is a form of compression in which the codec compresses the data within one frame relative to the others. Interframe compression compares the unchanging portion of successive frames from one frame to another and relies on block-based difference coding, block-based motion compensation, and bidirectional motion compensation. We're not going to say, if you can go on to slide 20, Kim. Good. We're not going to say very much about audio here because there's another AMIA webinar about it. But since there is audio associated with video, let's just say a couple of things. Should be slide 20, Kim. The sample rate is the number of samples of audio per second. Thus, 44,100 samples per second can be written as 44,100 hertz or 44.1 kilohertz. The important thing to note is that the more samples taken, the more detail the sound has. The bit depth measures the numbers of bits of information in each sample. For example, the bit depth for a compact disc digital audio is 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz or KHZ. Slide 21. Now that we've covered the very basics about the video and audio data, let's move on to some of the other information carried by digital video formats. Many different types of information can be accommodated within a digital video file. These can range from multiple video and audio tracks, closed captioning, subtitles, embedded and inherent metadata, and fixity data. Earlier in this webinar, Kate spoke about, and you can change to 22. Thank you. Earlier in this webinar, Kate spoke about the difference between a codec and a wrapper. Again, with digital video files, information about the stream and wrapper can be created and stored independently. For example, the particular wrapper may not store aspect ratio information, but rely on the video stream to describe the aspect for display. However, it is important to understand here that the particulars of where this information is stored is most important, because improper storage and description can create conflicts between the wrapper and the codec, possibly resulting in display issues due to the playback system's reliance on either the wrapper or the stream for its display. Slide 23. Good. Multiple video streams can be stored within a single wrapper to facilitate easily synchronized viewing of content with different subtitles or with different compression. For example, you can have a video file that contains an MPEG-2 program stream or an H.264 video stream. It's important to have, it is also very common, rather, to have audio, multiple audio streams or tracks stored within the container wrapper. Different streams can be stored for a variety of reasons. Storing different mixes of audio, let's say a normal stereo mix versus a 5.1 surround sound mix, for multiple display environments, or allowing for multiple languages or oral information to be stored and queued by the viewer. When there's more than one stream of audio or video, it's imperative that this data be tagged or identified through metadata about what it is, what its relationship to the other data streams, and any playback requirements. And slide 26. Enhanced language options include closed captions, timed text, and subtitles. These are all important features of broadcast collections, although they are less frequently encountered in other classes of content. The binary representation of this data, such as line 21 closed captions, would ideally need to be retained in a reformatted video. But more commonly, this data is moving towards XML presentation as timed text, created either as translation from the caption data or new data. Caption and subtitle text, once extracted and indexed, have clear value for archives, supporting search and retrieval, as well as other outcomes. And finally, we come to timecode. Timecode is a labeling system used to assign a number to each video frame and is generally expressed in binary coded decimal digits in the form of hours, minutes, seconds, frames. Non-drop timecode is used to label every video frame in numerically consecutive order. Drop frame timecode accounted for the slightly slower frame rate of colored television, which is 29.997 frames per second, and was particularly useful in network television settings where clock time is of the essence. Drop frame timecode skips 2 frames every minute except the 10th minute to correspond with clock time. This drop is only done in the timecode track and does not affect the video stream. Common types of time codes, linear time code. Linear time code, or LTC, was recorded on a tape in a longitudinal track akin to the audio tracks. This information can be decoded from a tape and stored within a digital file timecode stream. In order to overcome the challenges of keeping the timecode track separate from the video signal, vertical interval timecode, or VITC, was developed to allow for the timecode information to be stored in 1 or 2 lines of the vertical blanking interval of the video information itself. And that's a little bit of a bit of information there, but besides the 525 lines of the frame, much of that information is actually not seen, and information like the vertical interval timecode could be inserted in there along with captions and things like that. It's also possible for source recordings to have multiple timecodes, LTC, VITC, and others. In an article for the Journal of the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, digital conservator Carl Fleischauer of the Library of Congress writes, and I quote, "Any or all of these timecodes may provide forensic help for future researchers. A legacy timecode may be keyed to old documents like tape logs, may provide clues to the older source tapes that were assembled to create the video program you are preserving, and may, as with NASA space vehicle launches, represent elapsed time that can be correlated to other data streams. In many cases, this is data you do not want to lose," close quote. How well a format is equipped to deal with this complexity brings us to our next section.
Okay, hi Kim. So I'm going to take over from here. Thanks, Jim. So this slide is perhaps the question we all get the most. So how do I select what format to use? And in this webinar, we're not going to tell you what to do. So I'm sorry if that's what you chimed in for. But we're going to really help you try to understand the factors that go into making this decision. And everyone gets 2 points if you recognize this quote: "I seek not to know the answers, but to understand the question," from the classic 1970s TV series Kung Fu. So you can all see how I spent my youth. All right, so at the Library of Congress and the Sustainability of Digital Formats website, we've identified 2 types of factors that to consider when selecting formats. One group is sustainability factors, and the second is equality and functionality factors. Sustainability factors apply across digital formats in all categories of information, and they will be significant whether preservation strategies entail future migration to new formats, emulation of current software future computers, a hybrid of migration and emulation, or normalization on receipt. Quality and functionality factors pertain to the ability of a format to represent the significant characteristics required or expected by current and future users. These factors will vary by particular genres or forms of expression. There's a third group of other factors to consider for local implementation, although we don't really cover them on the sustainability website. I'm going to quickly run through our 7 sustainability factors. The first one is disclosure. Oops, we've gone too fast there. There we go. The first one is disclosure. And this refers to the complete specifications, or the degree to which, rather, specifications and tools for validating technical integrity exist and are accessible. Non-proprietary open standards are more usually fully documented and more likely to be supported by tools for validation than proprietary formats. Not always the case, but it's often the case. But what's most significant for sustainability is not approval by a recognized standards body, but rather the existence of that complete documentation. And we'll talk about that in a second when I show you some examples. Adoption is the degree to which formats are already used by the primary creators, disseminators, and users of information resources. This includes the use as a master format for delivery to end users and as a means for interchange between systems. If a format is widely adopted, it's less likely to become obsolete rapidly, and tools for migration and emulation are more likely to emerge from industries without specific investments by archival institutions. Transparency refers to the degree to which digital representation is open to direct analysis with basic tools, and this includes human readability using a text-only editor. Digital formats in which underlying information is represented simply and directly will be easier to migrate to new formats and more susceptible to digital archaeology. Encryption is incompatible with transparency, and compression somewhat inhibits transparency. Archival repositories, of course, must accept content compressed using publicly disclosed and widely adopted algorithms that are either lossless or have a degree of lossy compression that's acceptable to the creator, publisher, or primary user as a master version. Self-documentation. For self-documentation, digital objects must contain basic descriptive metadata, as well as technical and administrative metadata, which would make it easier to manage over the long term than data objects that do not incorporate metadata either to render or understand them. External dependencies refer to the degree to which a particular format depends on particular hardware, operating system, software for rendering or use, and the predicted complexity of dealing with those dependencies in a future technical environment. Some forms of interactive digital content, although not tied to particular media, are designed for use with specific hardware. The impact of patents is kind of a tricky one. This just refers to the degree to which the ability of archival institutions to sustain content in a format which may be inhibited by patents. It's not the existence of the patents that's the potential problem. It's the terms that the patent holders may choose to apply. And finally, technical protection mechanisms like encryption implemented in ways that prevent custodians from taking appropriate steps to preserve the digital content and make it accessible to future generations inhibits preservation and access. So let's look at a few quick examples for moving image formats. Here is the sustainability factors for QuickTime, or MOV. And we can see here that it's widely adopted. Here we go. I'm going to see if I can highlight there. You can follow my mouse there. It says it's widely, oops, maybe I won't touch my mouse until I need to move the page, that it's widely adopted, and even though it's proprietary, its documentation is freely available. We contrast that with the Apple ProRes family, which is also very highly adopted due to its use in the very popular Final Cut Pro software. But unlike MOV, the documentation for this proprietary codec is not easily available. You can find snippets of it through some third-party sites, but you can't actually get the full format documentation from Apple. So that's definitely an issue. And finally, we can look quickly at FFV1, which is an open source codec, which is growing in adoption. The documentation is freely available, but it varies in maturity, although thanks to the current Preforma project, this documentation will likely improve through its IETF standardization process. So that's definitely something to watch. And our second group of factors that we look at when thinking about what formats to select are quality and functionality factors. And these vary by genre. We have several different genres on our sustainability website, but we think all of the formats worth considering must offer base level functionality, which we call normal rendering. And we're cognizant that there are some valuable functions sort of beyond normal rendering, which we'll talk about in just a second. So here's what we use to describe specifically moving image formats. For moving images associated with user-end implementations, normal rendering consists of the playback of a single image stream with accompanying sound in mono or stereo through one or two speakers or headphones. Player software provides user controls over some picture elements like brightness, hue, contrast, some sound elements like volume, tone, balance, and navigation like fast forward. For formats implemented in specialized professional applications, normal rendering takes on a different flavor. Some professional authoring or editing systems, like those used in non-linear video editing, permit playback in a manner comparable to that described for user-end implementations, but in other contexts, depending on the encoding and essence structure, files may or may not be designed to play in the customary sense and are not intended for desktop PC applications. Functionality beyond normal rendering refers to the support for features that serve users with special interests. For the MOV example, we show on that screen I'll show you in just a second, we show that it supports various features like sprites and animation and virtual reality. Clarity refers to the degree in which high-resolution content may be reproduced within this format. This term is meant broadly, referring to the factors that will influence a careful viewing experience. A real test of clarity occurs when the reproduction is repurposed, so when selected footage is edited for a new video program. One key factor in the clarity of moving image files is the picture size, and in general, the greater picture size means greater clarity. So I just said just a moment ago about our function beyond normal rendering, and this is the MOV example. We described the factors for audio tracks in here as well, but you'll see here that in beyond normal rendering, we say it supports features, including sprites, animation, virtual reality, etc. So that's definitely something you'd want to take into consideration. And finally, sort of that last little group, these are local implementation considerations which you'd want to take into account, especially when you're reformatting old video tapes. So what's your planned volume in terms of both number and file size? Do you have enough storage? What controls and tools will you have access to? What's their capability? Are there tools and file deliverables integrated with other current internal systems? Will additional processing be needed? What's the level of comfort for current and planned staff with these tools? Oops, we're advancing too far there. There we go. And what are the outright and implicit costs for the creation and processing tools, storage, and staff time? Okay, so I'm going to, all right, there we go. Unlike some other content categories, there really isn't a slam dunk one single format recommendation that we can make for digital video. And there may never well be one. We will probably wind up as a community narrowing things down to a range of formats that would fit a variety of needs. One format does not rule them all. I hope we have some Tolkien fans in the audience here today. And I'm not checking chat, but if you can get my jokes, I'd appreciate a little bit of a shout out on the chat when we're wrapping up. All right, so we're going to move to our next slide here, I hope. Okay, so in practice, preferences among digital formats will be based on a finding of a balance among all of these sort of factors that we just talked about. Sometimes the factors compete, as we mentioned before. For example, some formats are widely adopted for delivery of content to end users, but they're proprietary or they apply a compression that you don't want. In such cases, disclosure can be a substitute for transparency. For content of high cultural value and for which a special functionality has particular significance, the ability of a format to support that functionality may outweigh the sustainability factors. And we mentioned before about the Apple ProRes 422HQ. It's proprietary, but it's widely adopted and has great image quality. So in some instances, a codec like that is just fine. It'll suit your needs. I feel like I'm playing with fire if I try to advance here. There we go. So let's move a little bit into some more specifics about reformatted video formats. So one place to start this discussion, and I think this discussion has no end at this point, it's still very much an active and emerging discussion, is a report that George Blood Audio, Video, and Film did for the Library of Congress in 2011, and it's published on the FADGI website. There's the link right there. And it gives reformatting options for a variety of video source materials, which include analog, file-based, and digital video on physical media. In 2014, FADGI produced a digital file formats for videotape reformatting report, and that came out of the FADGI AV Working Group, and that was led by my colleague Courtney Egan at the National Archives. And it outlined digital file formats for consideration when reformatting videotapes. Sometimes we call these target formats. I think we've gone too far again. There we go. Okay. These are sometimes called target formats. And these are output formats that an organization would reformat to. And these are some of the guiding principles that we came up with during that project, and you can read them there, right? To be capable of producing an authentic copy and complete copy of the original recording, and that's evidenced by paying attention to things like multiple time codes, captioning, and soundtracks. Not all wrappers offer these settings and capabilities to support this, and if you have a collection that has complex objects like multiple time codes and multiple audio tracks and captioning, you need to seek out a codec and wrapper that can support those. You want to be capable of producing maximized quality in terms of both picture and audio reproduction. In FADGI, we currently favor uncompressed or losslessly compressed essences, but we also recognize that not everyone has that mandate, and there's certainly lots of people in the, especially with extensive broadcast holdings, that apply lossy compression to their holdings. We also want to be cognizant of producing archival masters that can support the creation of access and access support elements. And so this means when we're reformatting a recording with closed captioning, for example, selecting a format that permits the movement or storage of a copy of this textual captioning data as something like XML means that the archival master contains a resource that can be more easily extracted for indexing, just as having an OCR rendering of a book text means that the book can be indexed in order to be more accessible to researchers. Let's see if I can advance. Yes, okay. The FADGI report includes a matrix to compare commonly used formats and wrappers for reformatted video. We offer comparisons of the wrappers AVI, MOV, or QuickTime, Matroska, MXF, and MPEG-2 for the ad hoc wrapper for MPEG-2, and the following encodings, which would be uncompressed, various slices of uncompressed, lossless JPEG 2000, FFV1, and MPEG. And I'll show you the matrix in just a second. The matrix columns list the formats we're looking at, and the rows are the evaluation factors. And I'll just say you're not meant to read this. Okay, this is just an example of just a hint about what it contains. But we're going to zoom in a little bit. But all of this information is online, and you should. Oops, let's go back there. All right, I'm going to smooth it. There we go. Okay. So you're not meant to read necessarily either of these things, but this is just sort of to give you guys a flavor of what information is contained on this matrix. This is a discussion of the sustainability factors section, and you can see here on the screen just for AVI and MOV, but the other wrappers continue off the screen. The matrix breaks the evaluation down into 4 main sections, which are listed here. We've already talked about the sustainability factors. The cost factors are what we call rough and ready. We've grouped them into cost ranges of low, medium, and high, depending on a specific topic. The system implementation factors includes how complicated it is to implement the toolset, what types of tools are available for playback, transcoding, metadata, etc. And finally, the settings and capabilities section, we evaluate all the criteria that are listed here. So what did we learn after all of that work? What did we learn? So out of all of the comparisons, was there a single winning format? And the team says no, not yet anyway. The practices and technology for video reformatting are still very much emergent, and there are many different schools of thought. Beyond the variation in practice, it's an archive's choice, and it may depend on what types of video they wish to reformat. Then there's a narrative section of this report that includes certain classes of information, such as VHS tapes that contain video oral history footage that can be successfully reproduced in a number of the formats that we compared. By contrast, a tape of finished television programs that contains multiple time codes, closed captioning, and 4 audio tracks can only be reproduced with full success in 1 or 2 of the formats compared. It is also the case that practical matters like an organization's current infrastructure, technical expertise, and/or budget constraints will influence format selection. One of the descriptive examples in the narrative section notes that at one federal agency, the move to a better format awaits the acquisition of more storage space and a different hardware and software. So if we just sort of look back on this, quality is certainly a factor, but there's other factors to think about when you're selecting your formats. It can definitely be influenced by functionality and other practical matters. So here are just some examples of what folks are using. I'll say that these are in no particular order, and they're not meant to imply endorsement or preference. It's just a snapshot of some of the things that are in play. All of these, by the way, are included in the additional resources handout. I'll also point out that the Media Preservation Initiative at IU Bloomington announced at the YASA meeting in Paris last week that they will be using FFV1 in Matroska, but there's no published document to link to that yet, but that's definitely a project to keep an eye on. And finally, I'll give a little shout out to the FADGI project for MXF AS07 application specification we've been working on for some time. This spec is quite hefty. It's 111 pages. But I would strongly recommend, if you're interested in this type of information, there are many different informative sections, and we have a great user needs document, and all of that information is available on the FADGI website. With great power comes great responsibility for Spider-Man fans out there. If you're creating new born digital files, you have the luxury and the curse of starting from scratch with your data capture, but that doesn't mean your format selection is clear-cut. In fact, born digital video will likely be more complicated than reformatted video because you have the options to create and store more information. Born digital video formats are volatile, right? There's new ones that seem to come up with some regularity, and archival and preservation practices are, at best, I would say, still emergent. There's a growing adoption for different formats in different communities, but it's premature for us to have one preferred format over another, but I would say there's lots of folks sort of working in this space. Creating new born digital video files requires a thoughtful approach from the very beginning of the video production project, even before shooting the video, which takes the long tail perspective of preservation, use, and reuse into account. These files eventually will be ingested into managed repositories, so format selection needs to take sustainability and interoperability into account. Because choices made during the file creation process will have impacts on the long-term archiving and distribution practice. So on a practical level, what does this mean? It means you have to understand your current needs, but plan for beyond them. There are some high-level recommended practices developed as part of the 2014 FADGI Creating and Archiving Born Digital Video project. Here's a table from the FADGI report, which outlines the current state of practice in 3 federal agencies creating born digital video. One important fact to note is that these case histories are the stories of specific projects within larger institutions. Other projects within the same institutions may have different requirements, outputs, and workflows. The case histories in this project, in this document set, should not be understood to be the monolithic institutional policy, but rather the reflection of a specific project at a certain point in time. Perhaps the main takeaway from the FADGI report is why each project chose the wrappers and encodings it did, and there were definitely trade-offs. So you can see here these acronyms mean the LC Civil Rights History Project, the NOAA Oceanics Explorer Project, and the Voice of America, their in-house STAM system. So they each use MOV, but different, 2 users of ProRes and 1 of DV25. Not that that's necessarily typical. Although this particular chart goes back a ways now, it's excerpted from an article by Dave McCarran in 2010, and it's sort of an excellent summary of HD formats for initial capture. It's a little hard to find, so I've given you the link there now, but I think it's quite handy. Here are some examples of format specifications for born digital video. Again, we're not endorsing, and there's no order here. They're just examples. They're from a varied set of examples, so you need to decide for yourself what's a close match for your situation. You have available to you the additional resources document. And I think, yeah, okay. So I think that's our question. That's our presentation time. So Kim, should we move over to chat questions?
Great. Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. Thank you so much to Kate and to Jim for packing a lot of information into that block of time. We can tackle some of the great questions that have been coming up via chat over the last little while here. So Ian Matson had a couple of questions. First, when selecting a format, do you recommend assessing the significant properties of the source prior to format migration?
I'm sorry, Kim, could you repeat that question?
Sure. When selecting a format,
yeah,
do you recommend assessing the significant properties of the source prior to format migration?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm just reading the chat, and people are telling me I'm a speedy talker, and yes, I'm from New York, and I can't help it, and I'm sorry, I should have slowed down. So I will try to speak slower now. And Kim, this webinar would be available for folks to watch in slow motion later, right?
Exactly. So okay. Subsequent to our session today, all of the participants who registered for the session are going to get an email from the AMIA office with information on how to access this webinar, so you can, yeah, watch it, slow it down, speed it up.
Sorry about that,
it'll be available to you. No.
Okay.
So yeah, if we take a look at the chat questions here.
Sure. So assessment of significant properties. Yeah. So one of the important things to recognize about video is, what information is within that video that you need to hold on to. So we talked a little bit about things like time code and closed caption. If your video has those things, and they may not, but if they have those things, you probably want to hang on to them. So your essential characteristics, or whatever the phrase that was used, yeah, that would be something you would definitely want to hang on to. If your video doesn't have that, then you don't necessarily have to worry about it at this point, although you may want to do some future planning and think, what if you get some of that in. The same thing if, your video is 8-bit or 10-bit. Sometimes 10-bit video is overkill for, and this may be heresy, right? But sometimes 10-bit video is overkill for your source video coming in. So you absolutely want to think about what are the essential characteristics of video in general, and we tried to highlight some of those here. But then also what is essential for the video that you are working with, and you need to look at that information carriage into whatever, if you're going to migrate or even just retain the information that you have in the current format. You're not doing any kind of reformatting. You need to understand what information is there and make sure that you're holding on to the information that you need and want to hang on to. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's scoot down a little bit.
I can. There were some questions early on, and good. Let me see here. There was a question about luma and chrominance. Does luma refer to light and chroma refer to color? Yes, in a nutshell, that's what it does. Chrominance, as I mentioned, chrominance is represented by Y. Rather, luminance is represented by Y, and chrominance is represented by U and V. And it gets a little more complex than that, actually. I mean, U and V are kind of U minus R and Y minus B. But that's the general idea, basically. And you can turn to our materials and find more at greater length. There was another question, and a really interesting question by Ian Matson, and that is what business case would include the preservation of user bits? And as a matter of fact, here at Washington University, I've been working on a collection of the Henry Hampton archive, which was Eyes on the Prize and the America's War on Poverty, the Great Depression series, Make Me a World, all kinds of stuff. And user bits was kind of like the essential way that they kept track of where they were going. Unfortunately, I have not yet been able to find a way of like capturing the user bit. I mean, we can capture the time code essences, but user bit just seems to be something we can't capture. But you know, sometimes you can possibly read it from your Betacam player, usually if you're playing back a Betacam SP tape. But we also were lucky enough to have a lot of data that we just kind of record separately. We use Mavis, and that's one of the descriptive fields that we use. Is what was the UBIT number, and that was a very important aspect of how they kind of kept track of their work. So user bits are basically another way of they can be encoded onto the tape, but they were another way of kind of tracking which tapes we're using in what interview, how we were going to build an interview, how we're going to build this part of the show. The Hampton people use that a lot. So that is a bit of information that we actually do keep track of.
Yeah, that's super interesting, Jim, because I actually have not come across UserBit before.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of people learned a little bit of something there. And I would assume that that's mostly in broadcast collections.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very interesting. Good. Let's see here. What else do we got? Does anyone have experience using DNxHD? I do not.
That's an Avid format.
Right, yeah. I do not.
I do not. I do not have experience with that either. We're kind of a Final Cut shop here, but you know, it's much like ProRes. It's a 422 format. It's much like, it's proprietary, of course, and it's much like ProRes. So you know, keeping track of that is going to be, and somebody mentioned that it can be transcoded using FFmpeg. FFmpeg is something that I would absolutely tell people to familiarize yourself with. It's very helpful. It can take on just about anything, and it's a really worthwhile knowledge to have, I think.
Great. I see another question about identifying whether a tape was recorded non-drop frame versus drop frame in terms of identification.
You know, I have, in my experience, I mean, usually you will find drop frame, the use of drop frame was, in my experience, and I was also a CBS person for a good number of years. Drop frame was generally used in the completion of programs that had to be on the clock. So it was used in, like, whether or not the show was at, you know, if they were editing a half-hour program or an hour-long program, it's what kind of kept the program kind of on the clock. Drop frame, you know, just plain drop frame, you'll find in a lot of shorter format things. Usually people were not paying too much attention. If they were building a 10-minute interview or something like that, they weren't using drop frame as much. That's just my experience. Now, you know, I mean, there are people who probably say certainly otherwise, but the use of drop frame was really when, like, you were dealing with, like, broadcast masters. They were usually working along with non-drop frame time code. I hope that helps.
Great, and I see another question. It's something here at New York University that we've been contemplating a great deal in recent months and year. interested in hearing from Kate and Jim if you have ideas about capture of analog tape, capturing closed caption signal from an analog tape in terms of software and hardware.
Huh. I don't know that I could tell you, being a U.S. federal government employee, I don't know that I could tell you specific hardware or software that can capture those things. But I mean, I would think most nonlinear editors have the capability to capture that data. But I don't think that I could give you specifics.
I would say, you know, my own knowledge of this is pretty limited, but I've been working lately with people are, you know, asking for putting closed captions on things, and you know, especially when we send them to, let's say, the National Film Preservation Foundation. The capture, to the best of my knowledge, the capture of line 21 closed captions depends on the ability of your card. So if you're working with a Blackmagic card or a or something like an AMIA, there's usually a setting on that somewhere that allows you to use. And I'm going to actually I need to actually pull my own system up here a moment. If you just give me a second. There's a setting that give me a second.
So I would also say that in the, I think it's the next webinar coming up, it's about workflow.
Enables.
Right, that's correct. So Kate, on Friday, Peter elected to actually work.
Use of timecode. It makes it possible for that stream to be filtered, and of course now I'm at a loss to find.
Yeah, well, I think we can make sure.
But
sorry.
Try my control panel here. Give me a second. It's VANC, V-A-N-C. That usually enables, and I have mine checked. When I look at I have a Kona LHE Plus card. Checking that allows you to filter through line 21 closed captioning. That is the best of my knowledge, you know, on that. I'm these days trying to work time closed captioning into things that we're doing, and it's an expensive proposition. Another thing you might do if you go online and look at this, these are questions you have, you'll see somebody. There's a guy who comes up a lot from a company called Telestream. Read some of his observations about this stuff. I mean, he's usually referring people to a product, but he's really, really good at what he does. So you know, that's another way you can kind of gain some knowledge about it.
Right. I think, Jim, you're referring to Matt Caption which is made by Telestream. But we will, in fact, be talking about more issues related to the digitization workflow in Peter Electric's talk on Friday. So Friday at the same time, we'll be talking about issues related to video workflow. So for those of you that are participating in Friday's session as well, this is really the first of a two-part session on video.
Right, we're just telling you how to store that information in a format. I'm not necessarily an expert how to get it into that, but I think that Peter will be more helpful, and that question would be applicable for Peter on Friday. So let's see. I think we have another helpful comment about how to distinguish time code, if it's drop or non-drop, by the representation of how it's written, the formatting of it's written. That's great. And Ann Wilkins, did we answer your questions about what are user bits? I think that it's sort of provenance, internal provenance data. Would that be a correct way to describe that, Jim? It's a new phrase for me. So
User bits, yeah, they can be encoded into tape. Ian Matson actually just came up with just a great bit of information there. Thank you, Ian. But yes, that it can be encoded onto a tape.
Is uncompressed YUV the same as uncompressed 422?
Yeah, that would be. I mean, we used. I used 10-bit uncompressed frequently enough, and 422 is usually included. Like I think V210 includes 422.
We actually cover these and if you want to take a look at the FADGI chart, we cover both of those, so that will be helpful for you. Ian provided some information about user bits. There's a question saying, gosh, you guys used a lot of acronyms. How can we get more information out of those? Kim, will the script for this be available? Or is it just the slides?
Currently, I believe it's only the slides, but I can double check while we're, but we'd be happy to, no, I believe the script is available as well, any notes that were in the presentation.
Okay, so most of Jim and I wrote down most of the information that we shared with you today, so all of that should be available when Kim makes it available. I would say you can always give me a shout and or send me an email, and I can help clarify anything that was not made clear today, and most likely the same with Jim. I'm going to go back
one. Absolutely.
And yeah, can we scoot back, Kim, on our slide? And it'll show our email addresses.
Yeah, just a moment.
Well, Kamer. Anyway, it's Kamer. It's a KMUR@love.gov. So if you should feel free to reach out. Let me just make sure that we've gotten all of the questions, or if there's any new questions. Lots of chatting about Avid.
One of the things that I think is, of course, it's both difficult and a fascinating aspect of all of this is that, you know, when we talk about digital formats and you know, you still have to remember kind of where we came from. We're kind of in a historical stream, and of course, so much of this was defined. You know, so we're starting with, in many cases, with analog materials, and there was a whole history of how you know, you get 525 scan lines into, you know, a digital file, and yet you have to kind of understand, like, how, you know, how do we have color television? How did we do that? And you know, you know, when I mentioned the slower frame rate of color video, analog video, you know, a lot of it is, you know, historical development as well. So it's good to kind of really look at the development of these things also.
Okay, so I think we may have gotten all of our questions, and Kim has happily said the script, the PowerPoint presentation includes both the slides as well as the presenter's notes, including my bad jokes. And so yeah, you should feel free to take a look at that, but also, oh, thank you, somebody laughed. So, but also you can feel free to follow up with any of us. I wonder, are there more questions, or are we?
We certainly have a few more minutes left. If folks have any additional questions, they can go ahead and send them to us via chat. Additionally, Kate and Jim's email addresses are on the screen currently, as well as Peter Alexic, who helped develop the curriculum for today's session. Peter will be delivering the talk on Friday from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. and that will be part 2 of our video webinar series. And the presentation recording, I see a question. The AMIA office will send that out, I believe, tomorrow. It usually is about a one-day turnaround time for them to get that out. So anyone who's registered for today's session will get a link to the recording as well. So,
oh, I see a late-breaking question. Any experience with managing 3D materials? I do not have any experience managing 3D materials. And what unique challenges does this technology represent? Gosh, enormous, right? I do not. I think we're probably getting 3D materials into the library, but in sort of a different section of the library. And I have not had any firsthand experience. But if anyone does, that'd be interesting to follow up. Jim, do you have any?
No, at this point, no. I'm sure those things will be coming, since we also have one of those devices that images working on the moon here. So it'll be interesting to see where that, all of that three-dimensional virtual reality stuff, what do we do to save that down the line?
Right.
I'm sure it's an issue we'll be addressing.
But thanks, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a very big issue.
High-def consumer camcorders have varying properties. All we can do now is capture and store the files, and then at some point migrate to a future format. Well, it would depend on what the what the format those camcorders are using. Just because something is in a proprietary format, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to move it out of that proprietary format. I mean, this is what we sort of talked about earlier on. It is, you have to sort of weigh the pros and cons of what happens when you move data from one storage object to another storage object. Are you going to be losing that data? So, if you have options in whatever consumer camcorder you have, to select a different format, you may think about using a highly adopted, well-documented format. But if it's only proprietary, then you may choose to move it out of that if there's not a wide tool set available. Here at the Library of Congress in the Culpeper facility, they normalize many things to JPEG 2000 and MXF. So most things that come in, not everything, but most things that come in would be normalized to that format. Not other places certainly don't do that. They may keep it in the original format and then maybe do some normalization on ingest later, or not. Maybe they just manage whatever the objects that comes in and then just document the structure of the file and the contents of the file. And that's their strategy for understanding that data and managing that data. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
Here in Washington, at WashU, we're at this point we're managing, camcorder files and camcorder tapes, and I would say, certainly down the line, this is one of those things that I'm hoping that, and we're also trying to retain the technology, which is a major part of doing this, and that is, hanging on to camcorders, tape players. Hi8 is a great example of that. That we can hold on to down the line and migrate. And I'm hoping that FFmpeg is something that will actually help us with this. Down the line, certainly an issue that we're beginning to address here.
Great. Well, a big thank you to both Kate and Jim for a really wonderful session this afternoon, or this morning, or this evening for some of you. I know we have participants on the West Coast and in Europe and abroad. So thanks to everyone for joining us for today's session. The recording will soon be available, and the materials are available to you now, the PDF and the PowerPoint in the Materials tab. So on behalf of the Association of Moving Image Archivists Online Continuing Education Task Force, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to have you in a future session. So thanks again, Kate. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Kim. And thanks everyone for attending.
Feel free to contact.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.